hanging out with my kitties and starting our session today with them purring in my lap. They like to join for the meditation and the practices that I do in the morning, but they came up here today when I went to go record for our class with Bhuta Yoga, so yeah, I felt like having them join the party. Come on, Raja. Welcome back, guys. Welcome to another class with Bhuta Yoga. Raja. I want to share today, before we begin, about Pranayama and Kriya. And last week we were focusing on... Okay, I'm going to put them downstairs. Say hi to the kittens. Hi, guys. So, as I was saying, I wanted to share today about Pranayama and Kriya. And I was taking some notes here because I'll be recording a Pranayama masterclass for the Bhuta Yoga library, and also diving into, eventually I'm going to record a sequence of videos that will cover kind of the intro to Pranayama, an introduction to Pranayama and Kriya as a integrated part of the path of yoga. And there's many different pieces of the puzzle that we can look at that, in my experience, over 10 years of having a daily pranayama practice, 11 years of practicing yoga, there has been a continual refinement and a continual understanding of what I'm doing when I start to work with my breath, what I'm looking for, some of the things to look out for in terms of, you hear a lot, and the key to pranayama is to not force. And last week in the session, we talked about how to practice in a way that was less forceful. And this is an interesting concept to work with, and it's something that's really important that we start to learn through the application of the asanas and the vinyasa practices that we do, because that sets us up for the pranayama. And if we look at the Yoga Sutras, pranayama comes after asana. And it's for that reason, right? It's a more refined practice. It's a subtler practice. We're starting to work with not just the breath, but the subtle life force currents that are underneath the breath. And that's something that a lot of times people are forgetting when they engage in, for example, breathwork practices, right? And there's tons of breathwork practices out there today. You can hear the birds singing. You hear that? There's tons of breathwork practices out there today, plenty of classes and practices and videos on YouTube, for example. And there's a rise of popularity for breathing techniques. And there could be many reasons for that, and we can speculate. And I just give a lot of thanks that people are starting to take interest in paying attention to their breath, just in general, because the breath, in its connection to the mind, in its connection to the life force, the prana, when we start to regulate our breathing processes, our respiratory process, it starts to regulate all the systems in the body. It starts to calm the mind. It starts to bring balance to, for example, the blood pressure. And a wide variety of benefits are accessible through the application of breathing techniques. So that's amazing. And I am just filled with appreciation that more and more people are taking interest in breathing practices and therefore the science of yoga, right? Because breathing practices are rooted in the tradition of yoga. And that being said, I think that there's something useful to start to look at when we're engaging in breathing practices that helps us to take those practices to another level. And the idea is that there's actually stages of practice when it comes to yoga. And there's an outer stage. It's seen as the kind of like dealing with the outer form of things. And this is where we see asana and vinyasa, and to some degree kriyas and bandhas and mudras all fit in that outer stage, because we're working on the gross structure of the body. But there's a point in which that path of working on the outer structure opens the doorway to the inner limbs of yoga. Seen as, in the Yoga Sutras, we see it as dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So all of the external practices lead us to the point in which pratyahara can take place, the withdrawal of the energy of the senses, that then can take us inward to perceive and become aware of the essential nature of the soul, right? And that is really important that we understand, I think, because without the correct view, right, without the correct sort of mood as we approach practice, and a understanding of the overview of the map and what we're really dealing with, then we can stay stuck on a certain level and never really receive the incredible benefits that come from the spiritual side of this path. You know what I mean? Like, there are benefits that go beyond what we even might be able to conceive of in the mind, in our current state of understanding. And the reason for that is because we start to break through to more refined levels of perception and subtler realms, which are currently inconceivable or very difficult to perceive at the level that our senses are currently developed and trained. And so when it comes to pranayama, we're dealing with the pranayama, the restraint or the control of the prana, the life force. And the senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the skin, there is energy traveling outward from our senses into the world to perceive the world, which on some level is a construct of our imagination. That is getting to the metaphysical root of the goal of yoga, right? Which is to liberate us from the constructs of the mind, to free us from all of the stories that we believe as true and that we project into our reality, and therefore continue to create the reality of our projection, to liberate us from those traps and those entanglements and those attachments, to be able to be actually free, to live in a state of complete openness and receptivity to life, and responsiveness to life, and sensitivity. Like there's some aspect to that which is having a fluid and adaptable mind, adaptable and fluid to the changing circumstances of life without getting caught up or fixed on things. So that's kind of the idea, we're working with these forces that are cosmic in their scope, and they manifest in the body, and they manifest in the mind, and they manifest in the life energy of that upholds this body, and they're mirrored in the cosmos. Right? This is the whole idea of Tantra, is that the microcosm is a mirror of and a reflection of the macrocosm. That is something that takes time to grasp conceptually, and once we start to understand it conceptually, we can practice in a way that allows us to build a relationship to those cosmic forces. And ultimately, the path of Hatha Yoga, which is what we're doing with Bhuta Yoga, as Bhuta Yoga is a derivative and to some degree a synonym of Hatha Yoga, we are learning how these currents flow and how they move through us and between us, to start to harness them and align them and channel them, so that that energy that's normally escaping and dissipating outward can then be withdrawn into the central channel, which is known as the Sushumna Nadi, right? So this is just some context and overview of what we're doing. And there are, as you probably know, there's many, many layers to that. And we start with some understanding of the theoretical framework behind it and applying what we know currently. And that opens up the door to discover more. And more of the mystery starts to reveal itself to us. And that is a relationship. It's a relational process that we grow from within ourselves. And I think the last thing I want to share before we get into our practice today, talking about Kriya, yeah? With Kriya is a term that is used in the Hatha Yoga texts referring to activity. And with Bhuta Yoga, we interpret the idea of Kriya under the principle of Kriya as being able to apply the right amount of effort at the right time. And this, if we don't have the previous stages really to some degree embodied, right? If we haven't developed our ability to have a relationship to the earth, to remain stable on our feet in our standing postures and sequences, but also that stability on our feet in our standing postures and sequences lends itself to stability when we go to sit, right? This is really important to the seated activities, which, as you may remember from what I was sharing just a moment ago, the inner stage of yoga, when the outer form has been complete, that only takes place once we have the ability to remain seated and calm and alert. And that stability and that alertness in the seated position doesn't happen accidentally. It's a cultivation process. It's a cultivation because if I'm sitting in Padmasana, which is one of the classical yoga positions and seen as one of the keys to pranayama, I'm not just pulling my legs in the position. There's actually activity through my lower body and all the way down into my feet and my toes, which keeps the energy circulating in a very rigorous process, actually, so that I'm sitting and my posture is holding the alignment of my spine, but the posture itself and how I'm choosing to sit and align my limbs keeps the energy moving through the periphery and feeding it back into the central channel. The central channel was seen as the pathway of fire, right? We have the solar channel on the right side, the Pingala Nadi. We have the lunar channel on the left side, the Ida Nadi. And those are the left and right dualities that exist inside of us. And when they become balanced and the energy of the periphery is no longer dissipated out, but can be circulated inward, then we have bandha, and then we have mudra. Mudra is a seal, yeah? And bandha and mudra are very closely related. Bandha refers more specifically to the inner mechanisms there's three main ones, right? At the pelvic floor, just above the center of the perineum, at the navel, Uddiyana Bandha, and at the throat, Jalandhara Bandha. And so those three bandhas hold and tie the energy together in that central channel, which then allow mudra, the seal of the energy, to take place. Is this, you following me so far? So these are Hatha Yoga concepts and techniques that transform what can be a mechanical process of breathing, like just a breathwork technique, for example, and transform it into pranayama, which then, through the application of the pranayama without force and a slow, steady build of the relationship with the life force and the prana, that energy starts to internalize, and then the doorway to yogic meditation opens up. which of course is the pathway to that supreme state of realizing the essential nature of who we are. So this is a very healing process. It's also a very transformative process. It's to some degree a fiery process. This is why we talk about tapas. And coming into this week, focusing on the element of fire and the principle of kriya, we can't speak about that without tapas, like that friction that's necessary through the right effort at the right time to create that transformative effect, which that transformation that we're talking about is the purification of densities in the body and in the mind, and obstructions to the currents of the life force through the body. As that happens, those energies start to become balanced and find their natural place. That is really what we're looking to do, to arrive at a place where our yoga practice and what we do in our sadhana helps to prepare us to be natural, to be sensitive and to be responsive without being fixed and without being rigid. So there are many ways that we can do that, yeah? And each time we come here and we practice together, we're just studying and deepening our study in these concepts and the application of these ideas into the inherent intelligence that's already existing inside of you and inside of I. We're just awakening a dormant intelligence. That is what the goal is. I could say more, but I think that is sufficient for now. So I'm going to go ahead and transition now, and we'll practice our session of Bhuta Yoga. Shall we? I'm going to clear the space and we'll get started.